What's up, and welcome to episode 15 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast, a series where I interview DFS pros about the mental health and lifestyle of playing DFS for a living. You may have the financial means to go pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to deal with the highs and lows? Welcome, I'm Braeden Greseth, and in today's episode, I interview Braeden Greseth, who, if you played NBA Showdown at all during this year's playoffs, you probably recognize his username from the top of your leaderboards of bgreseth, because Braeden has remarkably taken down 11 NBA Showdown GPPs in April and May. And don't worry, they passed the dupe check. Most of these were lightly chopped with other players. I chatted with Braeden about what it's like to be on such an insane heater, how his college work helped prepare him to build his own simulation and lineup creation software, what it's like to graduate last month and jump directly into being a DFS pro, and how to remain confident and evaluate your play even during a downswing. If you enjoyed this episode, we have plenty lined up in the future, so make sure you're subscribed, whether it's here on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app. And if you appreciate the interviews, give us a thumbs up or a 5-star rating to help others find the series. Let's get started. All right, so let's get started. And there are a couple ways I could introduce this next guest. I could say that he is the hottest NBA Showdown player on the planet. I could say that he is our third straight guest under 26 years old. But because there's no other better way to start a relationship than to talk shit, I'll say he was the second place finisher and runner-up at UFC 275 on DraftKings. Braeden, what's up, dude? How's it going?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Still salty about the Carla Esparza Rose fight. I mean, I think we had the exact same lineup in that. You had some guy who put up like 65 or something, and then I had Carla who put up like 53. So
real barn burner, 65 versus 53, but you still took home 100K, so you can't be too salty about that, right?
Yeah, I can't complain about that too much.
So, Braeden, you are, and I guess this is how we'll start, because you just graduated from college, like literally last month. I asked you, I said, before we started recording, I said, what do you do for a living? He's like, well, dude, I just graduated. So you just graduated, and you've had all this success, which we'll talk about here in a second. But first, what was your major and the focus in your studies?
Yeah, so I majored in industrial and systems engineering. For people who don't know, industrial and systems engineering, it's kind of a mix between business and engineering, and it mainly focuses on developing and optimizing processes and systems, usually in manufacturing and supply chain. I took a ton of stats classes for that major, which has really helped me out in DFS, and I also minored in computer science too, so I have a little bit of coding knowledge from that.
Optimizing and developing processes.
Yeah.
How familiar does that sound in creating
Lots
DFS
of
lineups?
similarities to DFS for sure.
Yeah, so before we get into your specific DFS play, what topics and courses from college do you think has helped you the most in DFS?
I mean, mainly just I had to take a ton of stats classes, so I'm pretty strong in statistics. Like I took a class on simulation, which I use simulation for DFS, so and some other stats classes as well. And then through my computer science minor, I'm not a great programmer, but I'm good enough to, if I have an idea, I can Google my way through it and figure out how to do it. So
as the best brains normally work, right? You have an idea, let Google tell me how to figure out how to
exactly,
actually do
yeah.
it. Have there been any other topics or papers or research or interests outside of college that you think has also helped you in DFS?
I would say I've been working on baseball this spring. I read a lot of academic research papers about baseball simulations, stuff like that. It's pretty similar to the stuff I did in college, but that, and then just a lot of like Google and YouTube videos about different programming concepts.
That's the way to go. So, all right, let's talk about DFS then, because it's a long road to get from where you started, I imagine, to all this NBA Showdown success. Because, as again, we'll talk about here in a second, but you have what, 10 plus Showdown wins in the playoffs alone, right, this year?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot, especially if you're counting like the $600 400 weight chops too. So.
On this show, we do not count those, but if it's 5 figures or more, we'll count those. I think from what I looked, you had at least 10 of those. So super impressive.
Yeah.
So when and how did you get into DFS?
So I started playing DFS right when I turned 18, back in 2018. I've been into fantasy football all my life. I've been a huge sports fan all my life, so DFS kind of naturally interested me. When I started off, I was a college freshman, so didn't have much money. I was, maybe playing like 10 bucks a slate or something super small like that. I was pretty bad too. Like I was just hand building, wasn't using projections or anything, but I enjoyed it and I was still interested in it. And then that's basically how I got started. And then I got more serious about it maybe like a year ago.
So, what prompted you to get more serious about it? And at what point did you gain confidence that you were picking up on something that you think, okay, maybe I have something here, maybe I can be successful?
Yeah, I just realized that I had pretty good skills in statistics and programming compared to most of the people I was playing against. So I figured I could use that to my advantage in some way. Last summer, I had an internship as a quality engineer. It was like an in-person internship. So I was there like 8 hours a day in an office, and I didn't have 8 hours worth of work to do all day. So I had a lot of time to kill. So I listened to a lot of DFS podcasts and had a lot of time to think of ideas during that time. And that's when I started to try to build my own models.
That's super interesting because from what you told me, and we'll talk about your process here later, is that you build most of your stuff by hand and use your own proprietary software and coding and whatnot. What was
Yeah.
the first DFS project you embarked on to try to figure out for yourself?
So the very first simulation model I made was for Valorant, actually. It's like a very obscure esport, but
Yeah.
that's like kind of how I built my bankroll. I was playing like really obscure sports and contests where I had a massive edge, and there was overlay as well in those contests. So Valorant, I made my own projections, I made my own simulation model. I don't think my projections were that great, but no one else was really using projections for Valorant.
That's a nice thing about niche sports or being early to a sport, right? As long as you have
Mm.
some sort of projections, most of the time they're better than what most people are even remotely using.
Yeah, and those contests were really small, so like it's not very scalable, which was good for me at the time because I didn't have much of a bankroll. So like you're not going to see like the big 150 maxers in those contests. Like it's mostly people building by hand, so the competition's a lot weaker in those contests.
I mean, that was smart to build your bankroll that way. So let's fast forward a little bit because your first big win was 100K on Yahoo
Mhm.
last NFL season. Real quick, before we talk about that specific win, what was the biggest win before that 100K?
I hit like a 10K win in FanDuel single game. So that was my biggest one before, and I had a couple in like the 5 to 10K range.
Was that mostly, what sport was that mostly?
NFL single game stuff mostly.
Cool. Okay, so 100K, what was it, week 9 or so, right? I'm sure you know the exact date and time.
Yeah, it was I think it was week 9. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so you went 100K on Yahoo. Talk to me about that sweat and what's going through your head that Sunday as all this is unfolding.
Yeah, so the sweat was actually pretty insane. I was like in third or fourth place. All my players were done. I didn't have any players left. And all the lineups in front of me had Chiefs defense. Chiefs defense, they were like the chalky defense that week. They were going up against the Packers, who had Jordan Love starting at quarterback. So that's why they were chalky. And Jordan Love's just awful, so they couldn't do anything all game. I had to root for a Jordan Love score, and I'm a Vikings fan too, so I hate the Packers. So it's tough to root for the Packers, but I will. 100 Ks on the line. So Jordan Love threw a touchdown pass to Alan Lazard with like a minute or two left, and it bumped all the lineups in front of me down, and I jumped up to first place.
That's
So
a rare sweat, by the way. Most of the
yeah,
time, you're rooting for someone in your team to score. When you're rooting for a defense to drop, I don't know if I've talked to anyone who's accomplished that. So, congrats on that. So, I imagine you were watching that game intently, right?
oh, it definitely, yeah.
What sports do you watch on a consistent basis aside from NFL?
So I don't watch as much sports as I used to. I used to watch a ton of college basketball, like back in high school. For NBA, I've been watching a lot in the playoffs. During the regular season, I wouldn't really watch the games I would play. I would tune in if with like 3 minutes left if I thought I had a chance to win something big. But I watch MMA until my lineups are dead. And then that's about it. I watch NFL too.
Okay, cool. So you watch a decent amount, right? You're not one of these guys who are just in the code and you're not watching the games. You do watch the games something at least. It sounds like.
Yeah, I don't really rely on my sports knowledge. I rely on the data, but I
Totally,
watch just for entertainment and sweating.
totally fair. All right, so 100K richer after week 9 last year. What was your thought process? What was your bankroll management and contest selection after saying, okay, you know what? Now I got 100K. I'm 20, 21, 22 years old. Add it to my bankroll. What was your plan?
Yeah, looking back on it, I probably should have cranked up my volume more than I did. I did end up increasing my volume a little bit, but I ended up withdrawing a lot, and then I had a ton of cash sitting in my bank account, and inflation. I was thinking, oh, inflation's out of control. I got to buy an appreciating asset, so I bought a bunch of Ethereum at 4,000, and
Hell
that turned
yeah.
out to be a terrible investment. So looking back, I wish I would have just put that into DFS instead of the markets, but I was able to increase my volume a little bit.
That win was on Yahoo. Did you take some out and spread it across all the sites, or did you keep most of it on Yahoo?
I did, yeah. I withdrew a lot to my bank account, and then because I have to save some for taxes and stuff.
Yep.
And then I bought some Ethereum too, which didn't end up well, but I'm still holding on. And then I distributed the rest to my other sites.
Okay, cool. So now let's fast forward to January of this year, which is when you told me you started playing NBA Showdown. I guess first the question I have is why the decision to jump into that specific sport and contest type?
I had some success in NFL single game just on Yahoo, and I didn't play a ton on DraftKings. NFL Showdown. I'm looking forward to do that this year, but I just thought it's a lot easier than NBA Classic, just in regards to the injuries and the late swap. Like it just doesn't seem fun to play NBA Classic and have to sit at your computer all night and worry about late swaps. And I don't think the edge, at least for me, would be massive in NBA Classic. I think the projections are so good. There's not a ton of variance. There's no dupes, so I don't think I would have a huge edge in that. But I liked NBA Showdown also because a lot of the pros and 150 maxers were just kind of throwing in 150 like in the Showdown contest as an afterthought almost because they have way more action on the classic slate. I feel like they cared about that a lot more than the Showdowns, and if I was specializing in that, I thought I could have a little bit of an advantage.
That absolutely makes sense. So when did you start seeing success in NBA Showdown?
So when I first started, I actually went on a little bit of a downswing. I was down maybe went a month or so before I hit anything big. And then in mid-February, I think I won 20K one day, and then 2 days later, I won 60K. It's like a 50K to first contest, and I got solo first. I had a ton of Isaiah Hartenstein for the Clippers, and it was a blowout. So he got some extra minutes. So I got first, and then I got third, and I had some other top 10 lineups too. So that was a pretty big win for me, and I cranked up my volume quite a bit after that win. I learned my lesson from my Yahoo win. I didn't buy any crypto with that.
Smart man. You get kept investing in NBA Showdown, which has paid off handsomely so far this playoffs.
Yeah.
But I guess the thing I want to know is you jump into this and you think you have this idea, you think that you have this edge, but you don't see success right away. So what was your mentality? Were you thinking that, oh, it's just pure variance, eventually I'm going to hit this? Were you thinking that maybe I'm not doing something right? How often were you tweaking your process the first 5-6 weeks before that first hit?
I didn't really tweak my process a whole lot. I was kind of starting to get discouraged after a month or so of not seeing results. I thought what I was doing was good. I would download the CSVs after every slate, and see how many dupes I had. What was my projection compared to other lineups? Comparing dupes to projection is a pretty good way to evaluate if your lineups are good or not. My lineups are grading out pretty well with those metrics, so I still was able to remain confident and then finally hit a big one.
So, and I was going to talk to you about this in the process portion of the show, but I guess that's one way that you evaluate your playing NBA Showdown is your dupes versus your projections, because it's a fine line in NBA Showdown, right? Like you can have,
Yeah.
it's easy to make 150 uniques, but it's very easy to also make uniques that have zero chance of winning. So do you have a goal that you're aiming for when it comes to duplicates in NBA Showdown? Or I guess what are you really looking for as far as the number of duplicates or uniques? And it obviously varies from slate to slate, but in general, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I don't have a set number of uniques that I'm looking for. I like to compare my uniques to the other 150 maxers to see how I stack up there. Like you said, every slate is different. Sometimes you'll get a slate where the top 3 salaried guys are out and there's no salary cap. Those slates you should have almost all uniques because you can leave a lot of salary on the table and still make a good lineup. Some slates where it's a lot tighter, And like if you have like one player that's way better than everyone else from a fantasy perspective, like if you have like Luca and like no other super high scorers, like it's a lot tougher to get unique in those slates I've found. So yeah, it varies a lot slate to slate.
Do you prefer one or the other? Do you prefer the salary wide open slates compared to the Luca slates?
Oh yeah, I prefer the salary wide open slates. Like the end of the NBA regular season, there were a ton of those. Like you get like
Oh yeah.
the Trailblazers versus the Thunders, where they're both like tanking, and they have
Everybody's
like
1K. That's all in the player pool
they're
that's playing.
exactly there's like the most expensive lineup you can make leaves like 10K on the table. Like those contests are just insane.
So now in the playoffs, obviously more stars are playing, so the slates are a little bit different. But the run you're on, as we talked about, has just been utterly nuts. So what are the feelings going through your head as you rack up these wins at just unprecedented levels?
Yeah, I'm trying to enjoy it. Like I know I'm definitely running hot right now, so it's not gonna last forever, but yeah, just enjoying it, trying to keep it going.
The biggest one you had this playoffs was what, like 67K or so? Was that the FanDuel one, or did you have a bigger one?
FanDuel I hit I think it was like 62.5, 45 the next night.
On FanDuel too, right? It was like back to
Yeah.
back.
Mhm.
So sick. All right, so let's keep talking about this process. And again, I usually don't dive deep into the process side of things on this show, but you mentioned that you wanted to talk about it. I do want to pick your brain on a couple of these topics. So you run your own simulations, and you also told me you have your own lineup creation software. I guess how did you get to that point where you use your own tools? You said you started with the modeling of Valorant, but I guess specifically the lineup creation software because there's others out there. You could easily use those. Why the decision to
Mhm.
do that, and how hard was that process to develop one you were comfortable with?
Yeah, I don't want to get into too much detail
Sure.
about this, but I think just like having my own software is a way to kind of get unique. Like I feel like if you're using the same projections as everyone else, using the same optimizer, doing the same thing as everyone else, it's kind of tough to gain an edge.
So would you say that the lineup creation software, and again, however much you're willing to share, I don't want to
Mhm.
force you to say anything you don't want to share. Would you say that is your biggest key to success, or is there something else that you attribute most to your NBA Showdown success?
Yeah, probably the lineup creation and then simulation. So I create a bunch of lineups and then run them through simulations, basically. So kind of those working hand in hand, and then I think I do a pretty good job at projecting dupes, even though projecting dupes is pretty tricky. Like I'll still have lineups sometimes where I think it's duped one time, it's going to be duped one time, and then it ends up being duped like 14 times. I actually ended up winning. I won like 13K or whatever these playoffs, and I look back at my projections and I had it projected for one dupe instead of
Ugh.
like 20 or whatever it had. And I was like, it's kind of mad about that, but
I mean, those are the most frustrating ones, the ones you think that are going to be unique. Did you go back and try to figure out, hey, how the hell, or do you just say, you know what, sometimes it's random and sometimes it happens?
yeah, I think there's just a ton of randomness when projecting dupes, and if my ownership projections are off by a little bit, that can cause some differences in my projections versus the actual number of dupes as well.
Yeah, so do you do your own minutes projections or do you aggregate from sources? Again, whatever you're willing to share.
Yeah, I don't do my own projections at all. I just use publicly available ones. I feel like the ones available are pretty good, and the amount of work that I would have to put in to make ones that are as good or better would just not be worth it. Sometimes I do, like if the projections just seem off to me, I'll tweak, but I rarely do that.
A quick timeout to remind you that this episode is sponsored by the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy, powered by DFS Magic. Are you tired of expensive DFS optimizers not providing the settings and tools you need to create profitable lineups in all sports? Check out the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy, created, built, and used by top DFS pros. Use it to hand build entries or automatically create up to 150 lineups using optimal lineup criteria and sport specific settings. Visit occupyfantasy.com/lineup builder for more information. Now back to the show. So you take these publicly available projections, and as you said, one of the edges is most people take those. A lot of people use those. In fact, probably most
Mhm.
in NBA contests use those, but they all use one of 2 to 4 optimizers that are out there. So you take them, you put them in your own software, you run the simulations. I've had conversations about this. What do you think are the pros and cons of using simulations?
Yeah, I think the pros. I think it's the best way to account for like the unique distributions of players and trying to figure out win probability of lineups. as well as, correlation between players. Correlation doesn't really matter in NBA as much, but like in sports like NFL or baseball or MMA even, there's not a ton of correlation, but there's correlation between lineups. Like if, like I had a lot of Menafield in MMA this past Saturday, and like he was super chalky, so like if he ends up losing, all the lineups that have him are pretty much toast. So accounting for correlation between lineups and correlation between players. I think it's the best way. And then cons, it can sometimes take a long time to run, and there's a lot of randomness. There can be randomness in your results if you don't let it run long enough, especially when you're trying to estimate probabilities that are really, really small, like a probability of a lineup to win a GPP. It's a very small number. So even if you're running like 10,000 simulations, there can be variance in your simulation results.
I mean, there's so much variance in what we do, and I have a lot of follow-up questions in different areas to what you just said. But let's stick with the variance aspect because the big question always is how much is variance and how much is skill. How do you determine that outside of those unique numbers? Are there other metrics that you use? And then how would you classify how you're playing right now in the playoffs?
I actually also like download the CSVs and run them back through my simulations and like see how everyone does in my simulated results. And like it's obviously going to be biased towards my lineups because I'm using the same inputs
Right.
that I'm using to build my lineups. But it's just kind of a good way for me to see like I usually grade out as like the best 150 maxer, which I should because I'm using my stuff to
Right.
run the simulations. But if I'm not, then I know that something maybe went wrong and I need to look at something.
So I guess my question is, I've always had this question about simulations. Is obviously you're going to be at least at the top somewhere, right? Top three, top five, as far as plus EV lineups made in your simulation software. But everyone who does simulations is going to have that same effect. So I guess how do you compare that, or is it just simply like I think I'm doing this the best, I'm number one, and this is the best way to do it, so therefore I have the best outcomes in my simulations. I guess just how do you compare that across other people who are probably doing similar techniques, although slightly different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think like, yeah, like you said, like I think what I'm doing is the best that I can right now. So, I mean, I think, running it back through my simulations is probably like the best way to evaluate my lineups. I don't think there's a better way that I can think of. So I'll just go with it, and then I kind of judge my success like not compared to other people, but like kind of relative to where I've been in the past and like the simulated results. So like I usually finish top of the 150 maxers. So if I finish like middle of the pack of the 150 maxers, then I know something's wrong with what I'm doing.
Totally fair. So, how often are you tweaking maybe this specific process or your process in general? Do you try to wait until the season is over for the most part, or are you making tweaks periodically throughout the season?
Yeah, I'm always making tweaks if I have, ideas for new stuff I want to try. My main focus right now has been baseball, trying to get my baseball stuff dialed in. I'm playing baseball for the first time this season, so I've had decent success. I got like second for 20K a couple days ago, and I got second one other time this season too. So I still have no idea if I'm good or not at baseball though. So
Right. All right. So, you mentioned how much time it can take and how much time you're willing to put in for simulations and waiting for the results and your process. So, I do want to talk about the lifestyle a little bit because you just graduated and this is your
mhm.
full-time job right now. So, tonight we're recording this on the Sunday. Game two is tonight. What does a typical NBA slate look like for you to prepare? And then just in general, since you graduated, what's a typical day look like?
Yeah, so I'll probably, sit down to start working on stuff at, the game starts at I think 7 Central, so I'll start working like an hour and a half before, so like 5:30. And then, my process it's pretty automated. Like I usually just like pull in the data, press run on my simulations and just wait for it to be done. So there's not much that goes into that. Like I usually try to stay, locked into the slate so I don't miss any news. So I'll put on maybe like a live before lock type of show or just like watch random YouTube videos while I'm waiting for it to run. But and then once it's done running, upload it to DraftKings, FanDuel, Yahoo, and then watch the games.
So, how long does it typically take for that process to run? And then let's just say 20 minutes before lock, we get news that all of a sudden a player's out or in, or even like game one, right? We got news.
Mhm.
We probably knew how it was trending, but we got news that Iguodala and Porter and Peyton were going to play. So how long does it take to rerun, and what is that scramble like before lock?
Yeah, so I could probably, throw some lineups together in like as little as 5 minutes if
Okay.
I needed to. If there's late breaking news, I mean, with simulations, the longer you let it run, the more accurate your results are going to be. So I want to be able to run it as long as possible. So I usually start like an hour and a half before and let my stuff run for an hour in an ideal situation if there's no breaking news.
That's interesting. So were you during the regular season? Were you playing like multiple showdown slates per night?
No, I would just play the biggest one,
Mm,
the one that usually started at 9 o'clock Central. I think they had some smaller ones too, but I just played the biggest one.
gotcha. Okay, so before graduation, when you were in school, what was your routine like then? I guess how many classes were you taking over the past 2 semesters, and how did DFS intertwine between your schoolwork?
Yeah, so spring semester I only had one class, so
Oh,
that was pretty nice. I had a lot of time to work on DFS, and I was playing a lot of intramural sports too, so having fun with that. First semester I had 4 classes, so a little bit busier. I wasn't doing NBA Showdown at that time. I was just playing NFL, so it's a lot less of a time commitment. But there were times where like I had a big group project, so I didn't. There were a lot of people who cared about it a lot more than I did, and I didn't want to completely slack off, but
right.
that got a little frustrating at times. Like I was at the Yahoo live final, and then like right after the live final, I had to go back up to my hotel room and record a final presentation for a class. Um,
That was in DC, right? At the National Harbor?
yeah, National Harbor,
Yeah, yeah,
NGM.
that's
Yep.
right up the street from me. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, so school's done, graduate. Was this your plan? Well, I guess how long has it been your plan to be like, all right, once I graduate, I'll just keep doing DFS?
Yeah, I mean it's become a lot more realistic of a plan over the last couple months, that I've been winning. Like if I wasn't winning big at DFS, I probably would be a lot more serious about looking for a full-time job right now. So my DFS success has allowed me to, have some more options and be a lot more selective about looking for a full-time job if I decide to go that route.
For sure. So, what do your friends and family think of your DFS play? This decision to, hey, I graduated, I'm gonna keep doing it. And
Mhm.
I don't know your relationship with your parents. What do they think of it? Basically, I asked this to Eric in the last episode. It's people whose opinions you value that you're close to. What are their opinions of what you're doing?
Yeah, so my dad's big into fantasy football. He's been playing fantasy football forever. Like he's been playing like before the internet. He likes to brag about his Dan Marino double stack teams that he had back in the day. So
It's a sick old
he
old man brag, right?
yeah. So yeah, he's pretty supportive about it. My mom doesn't understand it as much, but she supports it. I mean, they're both kind of also pushing me to get send out applications for full-time jobs too.
Of course.
Which I don't blame them, but friends in college, I kind of kept my DFS play kind of low key. Like my friends knew I played DFS, but not at like the level that I'm playing at.
What was the reason for that? Was it you just didn't want to talk about how much money you were making or risking, or what was the rationale behind hiding that from some of them?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't necessarily hiding. Like if they would ask, I would say, but yeah, I mean, it can just kind of be kind of awkward if you're talking about super large. You're making like a ton of money, and
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's totally fair. And a lot of people do talk about that on this show as well. For your parents or whoever else, when you told them and they're supportive, what got them on board the most? Was it you showing the receipts, like, look, I've won this and this and this and this, or was it them seeing the process and seeing that you're actually working at it?
I think winning is the big thing. Like if I was losing, like they wouldn't be as supportive, which makes a ton of sense. Um,
Yeah.
and then like the process behind it too. They see what I'm doing and they know that it's not just like complete luck. That like I'm not just like hitting the lottery.
Yeah, I think for parents that's a big difference, and a lot of people I actually who don't aren't familiar with gambling, like it's a big difference to be able to show them that it is there. Obviously, there's luck, but it's not all luck. There is some skill
Mhm.
involved as well. Are you in a relationship? And if so, if not, how has DFS your lifestyle impacted that area of your life?
I'm single right now, so I think I mean, it's probably a good thing for my DFS play. A lot more free time, so hasn't really affected DFS a whole lot.
All right, well that's good, I guess. And again, you don't play NBA Classic, so it's probably not that. It probably wouldn't be
Yeah,
that big of an impact, anyways. Right. So you said you play intramural sports some. So clearly you get out and exercise and do some things. Is that your primary way of balancing your lifestyle of being on the computer and running the numbers and whatnot?
yeah, exercise is pretty important to me. Like I my diet's pretty terrible, but as long as I'm exercising most days in the week, I feel like I'm staying pretty healthy. My screen time's pretty bad too. Like I'm
Yeah.
I'm probably staring at a screen way more than I should be. I should be getting outside more, but
Dude, aren't
it
we
is what it
all?
is.
It's tough, man. It's tough. Do you actually look at the number, the amount of hours you're on a screen?
Like for my phone, it's like 8 hours.
And that's not even
So, and
including
then
the computer time.
that's not counting the computer too. So it's
Yeah, man.
a lot.
That's rough. It's rough. I mean, it's hard too, right? It's definitely hard. So, all right, let's move a little bit because you did mention you had a downswing, right? And we haven't really talked about
Mm.
any lows. We just talked about this high the whole time. So I got to bring you down a little bit, right? So have you had any real lows since the 100K win or even before the 100K win as you're building the software? Any downswings or any mental lows this entire time of, or any setbacks or anything along that nature?
So I mentioned earlier that I like when I started off doing NBA Showdown, I didn't win right away. I was probably down like 15K right away, which I mean it doesn't sound like a ton now because I'm playing a lot more volume, but at the time it was a lot. So I kind of started to lose confidence a little bit, but I had the CSVs with my dupe numbers, my projection numbers, so I was able to maintain confidence throughout that and continue playing. And luckily, I hit a couple big ones. And then also, it's not a downswing necessarily, but you mentioned at the start of the show getting second in the big MMA contest. And then the Tuesday of that week, I got second in MLB for 20K. First place was 50K. And then the Wednesday of that week, I got solo second in an NBA Showdown
Oh,
for 25K. First was 100K. So it could have been. I had a big week. I won a lot of money that week, but it could have been way bigger. So that was. I mean, you're happy you win in those situations, but you're also a little disappointed
I'm not sure how many
about getting
people can relate to you on that, right? Because normally when I ask that question, people are saying they've lost six figures, but you're complaining about getting second place three straight times. But I totally understand, right? And it's super frustrating when the prizes are so top heavy. How do you
yeah.
compartmentalize that at all? Do you just you look at it, you brush it, and you move on? I guess how quickly are you able to move past the slate?
I mean, you just kind of have to move on. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, you're gonna get in the long run, you're gonna get as many good beats as you get bad beats. So just part of the game.
I mean, that's a super mature answer to have. And I think even a lot of people, whether it's your age or even my age or older, don't fully grasp that concept. And it's probably why a lot of DFS players lose, especially casual players. And a lot of people end up blowing their money or their bankroll, even if they do hit big. Where does that come from? Because you said you played fantasy football, but it's not like you're some of the guys that are typically on the show or the people on the show played poker or invested or whatever. So they have that risk reward background. What has contributed to you to have such a level head? Is it just listening to other people talk about it? Is it studying? What goes into that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like a poker background or anything like that. I don't have much of a background in finance or gambling or anything like that. I think it's just the right attitude to have. I mean, if you get mad at every single loss, every time you lose, you're gonna lose a lot in DFS. So if you get super frustrated every single slate you lose, it's gonna be pretty miserable.
That's definitely true. Were you like that when you first started playing? $10 a slate?
Um, Not really, but I mean, I would get frustrated, but I mean, it was only like $10, so it wasn't that serious.
All right, so it sounded like you had a level head from the start at least. So that's good to hear. And then when you were on that downswing in January, or things weren't going your way for NBA Showdown, were you continuing to play the same volume every slate, or were you pulling back some? Was it affecting your decision making at all?
I did kind of tone down my volume a little bit. I mean, I was only playing like 50 entries into the big one, and then so like they have like the big $15 one, and they have like a $6 one. So then at one point I switched down to the $6 one. I chopped first a couple times in those, winning like $1,000, each time. It's not nothing huge, but and then so I moved back to the $15 one, playing like 50 entries, and then I hit the 20K with 50 entries, and then I moved up to 150 lineups, and I hit like the 60K like 2 days later. So I was kind of starting to slowly tone down my play as I was losing, but
And then the DFS gods were like, no, we're not going to let you do that. We're going to let you
yeah.
hit 3 days in a row. So, all right, that's cool. So, all right, looking ahead to the future now, because again, you're still young. How long do you think you'd want to do this? How long do you think it can last? That's a big question too. And then is there anything in your mind that you want to do in the future? Any ideal career coming out of school? What's the future look like?
I mean, yeah, DFS pretty fun, so I want to do this as long as I can. If I can do it, continue to do it at a high level. Like you said, I don't know how long it's going to be around, how long it's going to be beatable. The level of play is increasing over time, so you got to continue to always improve and get better. As far as careers go, I'm keeping my options open. I mentioned earlier, like my DFS success has allowed me to be a lot more selective about job searching. Like if I wasn't winning in DFS, I probably would have just applied for a bunch of jobs and just taken whatever I could get. And if I didn't like it, then it would be have to deal with it. So I can be a lot more selective with that. And like I wouldn't be opposed to getting a full time job if it's something I can continue to play a DFS at a high level and it's something I enjoy.
I guess that's my full question because I always have trouble in figuring out if there was a full-time job out there, what would I actually truly enjoy? And I can never really come up with an answer. And some guests on this show have clear answers. Some guests are the same way as me. They're like, no, I'd never find one. So
Mhm.
just utopia, pure ideal world. What's that job that lets you play DFS full time, pays well, flexible, and you actually enjoy the work that you do? What do you think that would look like?
That's a really really tough question. And if I knew the answer to that, then
You would just go apply for those jobs, right?
I would just go apply for those jobs. There's not a ton out there, but I'm keeping my options open.
All right, fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. All right, so we'll get on with the show Sunday afternoon. So I know you got to build some lineups here in a little bit. So we'll talk about some final advice. Braeden, what do you think is the most important skill in being a DFS pro or a top DFS player?
I think a really important skill is finding unique edges that nobody's talking about. If it's something that's like if you search on YouTube how to win at DFS and you click on the first video, like if it's mentioned in that video, it's probably not an edge. So find stuff that people aren't talking about and stuff that's not as well known. I think that's probably the biggest skill to have.
It's a huge skill to have, and it's very important. So I'm glad you brought that up. And then, what would you tell someone who wants to become a DFS pro? Or let's say they were in your shoes, or there's someone out there, they have a full-time job and they're playing casually. What would you tell them if they say, hey, I want to become a DFS pro? Would you advise it? If so, what would you tell them? What would be the next steps?
I mean, it depends on the person. Like, if you can handle the major dollar amount swings, DFS, like winning 25K instead of or dropping from 100K down to 25K, or dropping from 100K to losing, those can be pretty tough, and I don't think everyone can handle those. But if you can, and if you are good at DFS and haven't think you have an edge, then I would say go for it.
All right, so you heard it there from Braeden. Braeden, I'll give you the floor. If there's anything we haven't talked about, anything, I know you don't do podcasts and you don't have a huge Twitter following, so I don't know if there's anything you want to promote, but anything you want to talk about that we haven't discussed, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me. It's fun to be on a podcast. Never been on a podcast before, so it's a good experience. I mean, I'm not super active on Twitter, but people can follow me at Braeden Greseth if you want to.
Fair enough. So you heard it there from Braeden. Braeden, appreciate you coming on the show and making your first podcast appearance. And everyone out there listening, we appreciate you for tuning in.